Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now that I have finished re-exploring 6.11, it's time to produce a guide for this. And I was thinking quite long and hard what would be the best format to create guide for this quest, because there are no individual path identities. Now the 2 or 3 kind of characteristics of this quest obviously are: number 1, that every fight in this quest has no retreat node active, and no retreat is a fairly intrusive node that definitely requires you to use kind of champions that are relatively compatible with it. Whilst on paper it does look like you can use virtually any champion with no retreat, just mind how often you dash back. When you actually get to the nitty gritty of these fights, you're going to quickly notice that there are some champions that handle this node much better and some that handle it much worse. Like for instance, champions that do have a playstyle that requires you to dex or dash back frequently, that I quickly learned, for instance, trying to use Misty Knight or trying to benefit from Scorpion synergy using Stealth Suit Spider-Man. It was just a huge big mess, so it's something that I personally probably would recommend avoiding. But since there are no individual path identities, instead I will first just explain which path I think is overall the easiest, or give you guys a couple of solutions or options for the easiest lanes. And then I'm going to go over the quest, highlight the hardest, the trickiest fights that you need to be aware of, because that is where 6.11 quickly reminded me, and perhaps even slightly humbled me, is that in Act 6, every single node, every single fight can pretty much be different, and Kabam loved to put in roadblock fights somewhere in the middle. For instance, like this Do You Bleed Hawkeye's third fight on the path, basically, and unless you have effective bleed champion, you're kind of stuck right there. So that is the first kind of key point. Whenever you do any path in Act 6, you do need to make sure that you go through nodes on every single fight. It's not like Act 7 at all. And then obviously, besides the no retreat counters, besides the problem fights, we need to look at the best Sabretooth counters. Before I get any further, I do want to remind you guys that Quicksilver Giveaway is still happening. You still have up until Tuesday, 16th of August, to submit your entries. I will leave all the relevant video links in the description, but it's very simple. Just record a duel with your 3-star Quicksilver, winning a fight against my Silver Surfer, and then send it over to Oliver on Evizone, and then winners will be announced live on Tuesday as soon as Quicksilver bundles go live, basically. And right, so let's jump, first things first, to the problem fights. And the first problem fight that can definitely mess people up is going to be this Aspect of War backup recovery Howard the Duck. So this basically immediately requires you to have an unstoppable counter. Aspect of War is a nasty node on its own, but when combined with no retreat and limited dashbacks, it can make it significantly harder to get that intercept in a well-timed manner. Therefore, you do want to have a champion that has access to slow or has other ways of dealing with Aspect of War, in a sense that maybe you have very effective power control, like Dr. Doom, don't let him use a single special attack and you're going to be fine as well, so on and so forth. So you definitely do need to keep in mind that you must have a counter to this Howard the Duck. Other than that, there's nothing too crazy on this lane. There is a Korg with Feats of Power and Power of Will, but, you know, it's just a Korg. Then on the next path, there is a Spite Mephisto that, again, obviously requires you to have an Incinerate immune champion, and ideally somebody that deals with Spite well. And the final fight there is All or Nothing Sentry. Right, moving on to the next path, I don't think there's anything particularly troubling, maybe aside this one Magneto, because obviously since this quest got released, Magneto has received a buff, so using a metal champion is going to be exceedingly hard. Plus, on top of it all, he has Strike Back and Masochism. You can get by this fight with tons of different champions that are relatively compatible with Masochism, but obviously you need to make sure that they are not metal. So be aware of this fight when you do plan your path. On this next lane, we do have Hawkeye that has Do You Bleed, that can serve as a total roadblock, so be completely aware of that. On a path following that, all 3 of the last lanes are something to be taken into consideration, all 3 of the last fights. You have Aspect of Evolution, All or Nothing, Symbiote Supreme, so you want to have access to some sort of power control on Taunt, like you did with that Sentry as well, but perhaps even more so. Then we have Abomination, that has obviously requirement of Poison immune champion, or a champion that deals with poison extremely well. And we have Strike Back, Static Blast, Domino that can be somewhat annoying. Moving on to the next path, there is Void, which obviously can be quite troublesome if you are running Liquid Courage Double Edge Mastery, so double immunity is required. And then we have Killmonger, and you will start the fight Fate Sealed, Power Locked, and Heal Blocked. So again, it's something to keep in consideration. Overall, this fight's doable with tons of different champions. It's just if you are aware of how to do it. And then there's nothing too special on this one. But we do have an Archangel out of all champion Roblox here. Be aware of this Archangel fight because it has Caustic Temper. So it means in order for you to do well in this fight and do damage, you need to be poison immune. And you need to have access to active Fury buff. Passive Furies will not work. It has to be an active Fury buff as stated in the note. And other than that, we have Bishop, obviously, that can be troublesome for most part. If you just push him to level 2s, you can use a ton of different champions, but still it's best that you are aware of it. And ideally, you want to have some sort of power control option for this Bane Aggression Fury Punisher that can go sideways very quickly due to Aggression Fury and Bane, and obviously the fact that Punisher's specials do a ton of damage in block. And then moving upwards on this lane, the fight that you ought to be aware of is Kingpin, where you definitely want to have some sort of access to power control, because in between Oscillate, Redouble Determination, No Retreat, and Kingpin's increased power gain on his own ability base, it is a fight where you're going to be baiting out a ton of special attacks unless you're careful. And then obviously we have Yellow Jacket that basically says do not use any special attacks ever. And since Yellow Jacket has been updated, you need to make sure that when he overheats, you can stay away from him, which will involve a lot of dashing back, which again is troublesome in no retreat circumstances. And yeah, you can't use a single special attack. So you do need some sort of nuke option for that fight, like Mole Man or Archangel or something similar to it. Or perhaps you can use Kitty Pryde, you know, bypassing a lot of the damage direct that's involved there and being ignored to the immune to the power sting. I left the last two lanes on purpose here because I do overall consider these to be some of the easiest ones. I will again give my recommendations in just a minute, but this this path that starts with Agent Venom. Agent Venom can be annoying, but I'm going to explain how best to deal with that guy in just a second. But then we only have to deal with Iron Man Infinity War, who has Oscillate and Redouble Determination. And then there is a Biohazard Gwenpool, which basically just requires, and Safeguard as well, but it basically just requires you to bring in a Bleed Immune. Other than that, there's nothing too troublesome on this lane. Green Goblin starts with 2 bars of power, but again, just bait out the level 2 at start and you will be fine, so it's nothing too crazy. So this Iron Man Infinity War path is quite easy, and the path that I typically consider to be the easy path is this one, where we have Tyranny, Aspect of Death, Red Skull, super easy if you use any Armor Break or Mystic Nullify champion. Then we have Iron Patriot, nothing special about it, he gets Enhanced Special 1, but does hardly no damage. Absolutely nothing special about Punisher 2099 fight. One fight that can be slightly annoying is this Nebula with increased power gain, so you do want to have access to decent amounts of power control. But that is quite literally the only fight on this entire path that is somewhat annoying. So this is the path that I recommend taking myself, starting Agent Venom, going to Red Skull, Iron Patriot, Punisher 2099, Nebula, and Gambit. And the other path is the one that goes with Guillotine, Psylocke, Mephisto, Rhino, and Sentry. I think that's fairly straightforward and easy path as well. Now that we have covered that, I will give the best options for these entire quests in general, champions that I got to test out and was impressed with their performance, as well as the boss counters. As far as boss goes, it's just the Sabretooth, whose regeneration you cannot reverse, and it has Oscillate and No Retreat. Oscillate is typically the thing that kind of makes this fight slightly more chaotic than it should be. So let's jump down to all the recommendations here. First of all, let's start with No Retreat options. Typically for No Retreat, what you want to be able to do is protect yourself from worst case scenarios, and worst case scenarios are when opponent is at 2+ bars of power and is just completely refusing to throw special attack. No retreat on its face, if you do not have to bait out opponent's special attacks, is super easy note. You don't really have to dash back all that often in most of the cases, especially if you're trying to be aggressive. Therefore, as long as opponent throws special attacks, every fight's quite easy. You just need to be conscious, again, about the frequency of your dashbacks. Therefore, by definition, best champions against no retreat typically are champions that have some sort of power manipulation in their kit, or something that makes AI more aggressive and or willing to throw special attacks, such as taunt mechanic, for instance. Therefore, Dragonman was a pleasant surprise, because you can be aggressive, push opponent in their corner, get them past 2 bars of power, and they will hardly be gaining any power at all. And then there's going to be a very long window of time where you can just beat up on your opponent, and if they throw a special attack, good. If they don't, it's not the biggest deal, and it just extends that amount of time that you just don't really have to worry about baiting out special attack. Captain America Sam Wilson worked out tremendously well, also because of his long persisting power drain. So once you do get 25 sap charges, which is not that hard to do, basically you can be as aggressive as you possibly want to be, because every time you hit them past 3 bars of power, obviously they are capped at 3 bars and they get their power drain just a little bit. And you can be basically mega aggressive the entire fight, because you can stack up these power drains. So Captain America Sam Wilson was super cool. One champion that took me by surprise overall in this quest was Hood. Hood also does excellent job dealing with these nodes, because A, he does have power steal if he is awakened, but B, also because of your phasing, you can afford to leave yourself opened more often. Therefore, opponents typically throw their special attacks much more easily. And also, you do not need to worry about as much as other champions would against dexing special attacks, or, you know, doing perfect dodges against unblockable special attacks, because much of that is going to miss through your invisibility anyways. So Hood did perform absolutely amazingly for me over the quest. Then we have some, again, town champions like Miles Morales and Spider-Ham, both very great options. And Ebony Maw was, again, one of the unsung heroes here, because with Ebony Maw, you can keep attacking opponent indefinitely, and you never ever have to bait out special attack. If opponent is nearly at 3 bars of power, what do? Well, you just throw your heavy attacks. And that's it. If they don't want to throw that special, cool. Throw another heavy attack, because you can push them 3 bars of power and then power drain. Push them 3 bars power and power drain. So Ebony Maw works phenomenally. And then obviously your level 3 has power drain as well. There we go. Ebony Maw was amazing. Hawkeye is fairly similar idea. Just spam your level 1s, power drain them, and you never really have to worry about baiting special attacks. Therefore, no retreat doesn't really come up as a big problem. Hulkbuster works in a similar fashion. And then we have Punisher 2099, one of the best hidden gems here. Because if you just start your fight slightly later, just parry a bit initially, and then once you do go into overdrive, typically you will be able to kill your opponents at around the time they get their first bar of power, unless you have tech mastery, in which case they will never get a bar of power. But the point is, with Punisher, you never have to bait out special attacks. So Punisher was amazing for no retreat. And then obviously we do have a ton of really popular champions that also synergize extremely well with no retreat, which I didn't test out this time around, but I just know for a fact that they work. These aren't obviously only champions that work, but the staple champions, Hercules for instance, because he does have Infuriate, which makes it easier to bait out special attacks. On top of that, he has Immortality, which basically means that you can completely ignore no retreat, take all the degen damage in the world that you please, and you're still gonna blast through the fights. Similar with Ghost, if you use a full Trinity, you don't need to worry about dashing back too much, and even if you do get the degen, thanks to Hood synergy, you can kind of weather most of it without significant damage. Archangel can shrug off no retreat. Quake, especially if you're even only comfortable with parry heavy style, works perfectly. CGR, again, just nuke them down and go into your full nuke rotation. Kitty Pryde, phase through most of the damage. Doom, you never have to bait out special attack due to power control. Claire, similar. Mr. Fantastic reduces opponent's combat power rate drastically, has access to taunt, wonderful option. Mr. Negative reduces opponent's combat power rate and reduces the degeneration damage for each debuff you place on opponent. Now, unfortunately, no retreat does not trigger his regeneration, otherwise he would be absolutely OP here. But even as is, it still works exceedingly well. Then we have Null, obviously reducing opponent's combat power rate per armor break, so once you do ramp him up, it's going to be quite easy time there. And then on top of it, he does also have significant degen resistance, so you don't take nowhere near as much damage as most other champions would. King Groot, just purely based on his health pool and his ability to regenerate a bunch of Nord 3 damage extremely quickly, works quite well. Magic, power control, Starking Hands, Spider-Man, as well heavy attack, power control on Towns, She-Hulk, his Furies. Obviously there are more champions, these are just kind of like my suggestions from top of the head, but all of these champions that are listed on the screen synergize very, very well with this quest and with the nodes that you will find in this quest. As you will notice, for instance, we had several things to note, like all or nothing nodes. Then Spider-Ham, Miles Morales, Ebony Maw, all of those champions work extremely well. Captain America 7, Wilson, Punisher, most of these champions can do those fights, for instance. Right, and now let's take a look at Sabretooth Counters. And Sabretooth Counters are also fairly straightforward, to be honest. Now, I listed in the first line champions that I know for a fact absolutely destroyed. Second line are the champions that I kind of tried and messed around with and that worked great. I actually did try to kill Sabretooth with a 5-star rank 3 Nimrod and succeeded. So even a 5-star rank 3 Nimrod can solo this Sabretooth. Then obviously we have Meg Sentinel, Warlock, Archangel, Mr. Fantastic, Diablo, Kitty, Apoc, Hercules, CGR, Null Cable, and rest of your super heavy hitters that can solo this fight. But these are kind of the ones that come, you know, from top of my head. Now the champions that I tried out this time around when I was clearing the entire thing, Captain America Sam Wilson is probably one of the most pleasant clears. It worked out extremely well. You just basically get your 25 sub charges and never worry about betting out special attack and then just be super aggressive. Toad, because of his poison, super easy regen mitigation, didn't, you know, present much trouble. Overseer, again, whenever he uses special attack, he gets a special concussion debuff, which in synergy with Despair mitigates his regeneration. Overseer has access to Taunt, and then you just nuke the opponent. Hulkbuster worked brilliantly, where you can throw your level 2 in a block whenever he is in his armor phase. Extremely easy. And if he is in his fury phase, you can just build up to your level 3. Drop that, it's still gonna drain the power, it's still gonna do a ton of damage. Rinter worked well, and again, Hood was one of my favorite takedowns here against Sabretooth because of that one massive detonation. But yeah, Hood worked extremely well because you could avoid a lot of block damage by just phasing the initial hits of opponent's special attacks and then dashing out of it, so that invisibility really came in clutch there for Hood. So those are overall kind of like the counters and options that I personally tried out as I was redoing this quest. Obviously, these are not the only options. The main key takeaway, again, would be that you always need to make sure that you read every single fight on the path that you are about to do. Because as I mentioned, there are these fights with Aspect of War, with random all or nothing, with random do you bleed, with random caustic temper that will catch you off guard. For initial clear, I would go upwards, defeat Agent Venom, and then deal with whichever path you find easier. Also, dealing with Agent Venom, obviously, ideally, you want to bring in some way how to get guaranteed opening. So I personally tried out somebody like Hood, for instance. He worked fantastic here. Or you can bring in also Magneto, House of X, or something else that lets you get easy guaranteed openings against Agent Venom, and then the fight isn't all that troublesome. But yeah, I think that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope some of you find it useful. And, well, if you do, then I'm gonna carry on, plow through the rest of 6.1 and get to the next chapters as soon as possible. Let me know what kind of feedback you can leave for me. Are you alright with this current format where I kind of break down the node, the boss, the trouble fights, and the best counters? And I'm gonna catch you guys soon. So yeah. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the